Story 1. The Dark Journey of a Doll. When I was 10 years old, my friend Jay came over as usual on Saturday. We spent hours playing video games and exploring the house, but something about that day felt different to me. The playroom, usually a cheerful space filled with toys and laughter, had an unusual atmosphere. An old toy doll from my sister's collection sat in the middle of the room, staring at us with its porcelain eyes. It was a doll we hadn't seen in years, and it gave off an unsettling aura that we couldn't quite place. We shook off the strange feeling and went outside to play. When we returned, however, Jay's face was ashen. He pointed into the hallway where the doll was crawling on all fours, its movements jerky and unnatural. It wasn't just the doll's sudden reappearance that was alarming. It was its strange, almost mechanical movements. We tried to convince ourselves it was a prank, but my sister was asleep and our parents had been out for hours. We put the doll back in the playroom, locking the door behind us. But our peace was short-lived. Over the next few weeks, the doll seemed to defy all logic. It would reappear in places it couldn't reach, on a bookshelf perched on a windowsill. One night, while we were having dinner, Jay saw it again. The doll was sitting on the dining table, its eyes locked on us, as if it were judging our every move. We were so frightened that we decided to throw it away. We threw it in the trash outside, hoping that would be the end of it. The next morning, however, the doll was back, half submerged in the dirt by the path. Its eyes seemed to follow us, and we couldn't shake the feeling that it had been placed there on purpose. My mother, alarmed by the doll's presence, burned it, but the fear remained. Story 2. Shadows in the Aisles. I started working the night shift at a local store, a job I had gotten through a friend. The store was a maze of dark aisles and empty spaces, creating an unsettling atmosphere after dark. My first night, while stocking shelves in aisle 8, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A faint figure flitting by, disappearing into a dark corner. When I checked, there was nothing there. My friend, who had worked the shift before me, had mentioned similar experiences but had not thought much of them. As the weeks went on, however, these occurrences became more frequent and more frightening. I began to hear unexplainable noises, whispers, rustles, and occasional bumps that seemed to come from nowhere. Shadowy figures darted in and out of sight, their shapes flashing between aisles and disappearing just as quickly. One night, as I was rearranging things in the back room, I heard a loud crash followed by an eerie silence. I checked and found a loaf of bread lying in the middle of the floor, as if it had been thrown. This was just one of many unexplained events. Doors shook on their own, and objects seemed to move or fall for no reason. The most disturbing incident occurred when a female cashier heard a loud and persistent knocking on the bathroom door, even though she was alone in the store. Security footage showed a brief period of static before she fled the scene. Another night, during a power outage, I heard a low growl coming from the aisle. Shadows seemed to move, gathering into a shadowy mass that crawled along the shelves. The climax was when heavy footsteps thundered down the basement stairs, but when we went to check, no one was there. Then the store management decided to end the night shift, and none of us wanted to work those hours anymore. Story 3. The Shadow in the Doorway. When my family moved into a new apartment, I was excited about the fresh start. However, my excitement quickly turned to fear. The apartment was old, and from the moment we moved in, I began to experience unsettling phenomena. One night, while watching TV in the living room, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the kitchen doorway. It was a dark, oppressive figure that seemed to absorb the light around it. My heart was pounding, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. Although I tried to ignore it, the events continued. One evening, my brother and our dog were in the kitchen when the dog suddenly growled and cowered under the sofa, its fur standing on end. My brother saw the same shadow in the doorway and tried to confront it, but the shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. We tried to rationalize the experience, blaming it on the age of the apartment and our overactive imaginations. But the chill remained. Years later, after moving out, I drove past my old apartment, now under renovation. As I looked at the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow still lingered, waiting for the next tenant. Story 4. The Haunted House in Germany. Our family's new home in Germany, a grand Victorian mansion, towered over the landscape. Built in the late 1800s, the house was steeped in history and mystery. It had been empty for decades before we moved in, its walls whispering tales of The grandeur of the house was undeniable, but its eerie silence was unsettling. The first sign that something was amiss came soon after we moved in. My older sister, Elise, had always been sensitive to the supernatural, and her unease quickly became apparent. One summer afternoon, while playing in the garden, she noticed a figure emerging from behind a pile of firewood. The figure, a dark figure with indistinct outlines, seemed to be watching her. Elise assumed it was our father playing a prank, but when she called out, there was no answer. When she checked, the woodpile was empty, and a cold wind blew through, chilling her to the bone. Elise's experiences continued, each more disturbing than the last. She would often hear scratching sounds coming from the walls, a constant, scurrying sound that seemed to follow her from room to room. At night, she would wake to find the temperature in her room dropping sharply, her breath visible in the cold air. The presence in the house made her feel suffocated, as if something was watching her, waiting for her to acknowledge it. My mother, who had initially dismissed Elise's fears as an overactive imagination, soon had her own disturbing encounters. One evening, while preparing dinner in the kitchen, she saw a dark figure dart across the room. When she turned to investigate, she was confronted by a figure that looked like a large stingray, drifting toward her with almost predatory intent. The shadow seemed to shimmer and ripple, its movement smooth but unnatural. My mother, paralyzed with fear, watched the figure get closer, only for it to disappear before it reached her. The climax of our haunting experiences occurred one stormy night. A series of loud crashes echoed from the basement, followed by a hoarse, inhuman growl that echoed throughout the house. My father, despite the storm, went into the basement with a flashlight. He found nothing but scattered boxes and the remains of old furniture. However, the terrifying growling continued in the darkness, growing louder and more terrifying. Desperate for answers, we contacted local historians and paranormal experts. They revealed that the house had once been owned by a reclusive count who was known for his dark activities. It is said that the count disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a legacy of fear and superstition. Experts believe that the house's dark history may have awakened something sinister. Our family decided to leave the mansion, unable to bear the constant fear that surrounded us. As we packed our belongings, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to increase, as if the house itself were mourning our departure. To this day, the memory of the mansion's haunting presence remains, and the shadows remain a chilling reminder of the house's dark. Story 5. The Strange Cabin in the Woods. Our family's cabin, deep in the heart of the woods, is a relic of a bygone era. The cabin, built by the daughter of a banished native chief, has always been shrouded in local legend and mystery. The isolation of the cabin, surrounded by dense forests and a foreboding atmosphere, makes it a place both fascinating and terrifying. The history of the cabin is a tapestry of macabre tales. It is said that the chief's daughter was banished from the tribe for performing forbidden rituals. Stories say that she cursed the land before her disappearance, swearing that her spirit would protect the cabin from trespassers. Over time, the cabin has deteriorated, its once vibrant colors fading into a dull hue of decay. My family and I initially saw the cabin as an exotic retreat, a place to escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life. However, from the moment we arrived, the atmosphere was thick with an ominous presence. The interior of the cabin was a maze of dark wood and faded wallpaper, each room seemingly holding its own secrets. One night, as I sat by the fireplace, I felt an inexplicable chill spread throughout the room. The warmth of the fire seemed to be absorbed by the oppressive cold that enveloped us. My parents and I exchanged uneasy glances, each of us sensing that something was wrong. We tried to ignore the feeling, but we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. During our stay, we often heard strange noises, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and the echoes of footsteps echoing through the empty room. The creaking floors of the cabin would groan underfoot, and objects would occasionally shift or fall for no reason. There was a constant sense of dread, a weight that weighed down on us whenever we were near the cabin. The most disturbing encounter occurred one evening as we were preparing to leave. I was alone in the kitchen when I heard a series of loud knocks on the door. The knocks continued, getting louder and more urgent as the seconds passed. I hesitated before opening the door, only to find no one outside, just the eerie silence of the woods. The feeling of being watched grew, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the trees. Our attempts to rationalize the experiences only made the unsettling feeling more palpable. Local legends told of the cabin's dark past, but it was our encounters that made the legends all too real. Every time we entered the cabin, we felt a lingering sense of dread, a reminder of the malevolent presence that seemed to reside within the old structure. We eventually decided to leave the cabin, unable to ignore the oppressive atmosphere any longer. Even now, when I think back to those days, the memory of the cabin's dark energy remains a haunting reminder of the forces that once resided within its walls.